Hi, everyone. Welcome to Optimized for Humans, a podcast where we explore how we can reimagine organizations in the age of AI. This podcast is going to explore how we can make the most of the human potential and human workforce within organizations and how we can strategically outsource all of the rest to artificial intelligence. My name is Usha. I'm an executive coach and consultant. I'm passionate about supporting leaders in building high-performing, human-centric organizations. And I'm very lucky today to be joined by Julie Clow, Dr. Julie Clow, who is an organizational culture expert, a behavioral psychologist, and author of the book Work Revolution. Julie has worked with organizations like Google, Two Sigma, and Chanel. I was very lucky to work with Julie at Chanel as we thought about how we can reimagine ways of working within Chanel. And she's currently working as an independent consultant, helping other lucky organizations revolutionize how they approach people and leadership. Julie, thank you for being here and welcome.
It is my pleasure. It's really cool to have this conversation after years ago having worked together on some of these challenges. So really cool to connect and chat about this stuff.
So I want to start by the first question, which is, what do you see as uniquely human capabilities and uniquely human potential that we should be amplifying within organizations?
Yeah, I think this is always a good question to be asking ourselves. And I think that we will find that some of the answers stay the same and some sort of emerge and evolve as we are on this journey of technology and digitalization and so forth. I think, the sort of top line thing is vision and inspiration. That is something uniquely human that requires not just strategy, but also connection to people to bring that alive. And that's something that I think is just so uniquely human and so uniquely part of an organization that is do or die. Either you get it right and you get all these people following, or you get it wrong and you die a slow death, essentially. Slow or fast, depends. I think another thing which is sort of emerging for me in this day and age is courage. And I think there's courage to be doing the right things, to be making the hard decisions, and charting the course, both for our individual lives, but also for our businesses. And it's difficult because it means standing up for the things we believe are right, even when financially it might not make the best decision in the short term, but having the courage to make that decision for the long term and really standing by principles and values that are important to an organization. Another thing that sort of came to me is this notion of community and connection. That is ultimately the most human thing of them all, and my partner and I a year ago just started a CrossFit gym. And after having worked for, 20 some years in the corporate world for both of us, having a small business that's rooted into the community that connects people, not just for fitness, but on interests and passions and similar journeys, that has been so special to see that come to life, to build that, to shape it. And it also occurs to me that my best experiences working for organizations was the connections, was the relationships with other people. So that for me is, the ultimate of humanness, is you can't fake that and you can never outsource that.
Yeah, it's so interesting. The piece around like vision and values, I think we often see in organizations when that's done well and when that's done poorly. And it really comes down to people's connection to that vision and to that values, right? And you can have the most interesting values, the most interesting, meaningful, impactful vision, the most inspiring vision, but it's really, I think, how the leaders communicate that, how leaders actually connect with people around that and make it relevant for them, that makes all the difference. And I think often I'm sure we've both spent time with leadership teams toiling away over like this word or that word. And of course, the semantics do matter in these scenarios, but it's actually how people connect to that. It's the stories around that that make the biggest difference, you know? And I think we're definitely underestimating the power of connection and the power of connecting like human to human. And so it'll be really interesting to see how we kind of continue to prioritize that and amplify that as AI takes on all of these other mundane and administrative things. And I really like the frame too in the vision context of like the humans are setting the course and the AI is like the bots are helping us get there. And I think and you know, we don't have crystal balls, so I think it'll be interesting to see how the capability of the artificial intelligence enhances over time. But there's something about us being in the driver's seat with the kind of judgment and ethics and empathy in place that feels really crucial and really critical. And I think while it's tempting to assume that that's like Sam Altman at OpenAI's job, or, you know, it's the heads of these people who are creating the AI, I think it's actually every single leader in every organization who's kind of thinking through this human AI partnership that brings this to life.
Absolutely. And I think we have so much at risk in ignoring the connections in the community, not just with the people who work in an organization, but the communities of people who follow us, you know, the products and the services. And I think that's something that's, you also can't outsource that to AI. It's how you make those connections at the end of the day with who you're serving.
Totally. And I mean, I know we've all seen this in marketing, which is like people buy products when they feel connected to something in all of it, right? Whether that's the mission or the impact or just the kind of the problem statement or what have you, but that connection element is really crucial. Well, one of the things that I know you're passionate about and you speak a lot about is group IQ. And I think that's really relevant to this conversation. So tell us more, give us a starting point. What is group IQ and why is it important?
Yeah, this is an area that has really crystallized my area of focus now as an independent practitioner. So the term that I like to use is collective IQ. So, you know, you think about the fact that we hire top talent. You know, our obsession is getting the best talent in the doors of our organization. And then we get them in place. And what do? We put them in teams. Okay, sounds good. But then we continue to imagine that these high performers are going to do great things, but yet we're putting them in conditions that are subpar. And in fact, when you are working together as a team, you know, it requires so many other layers of thoughtfulness around how you're getting the best out of your people. And so this is what I call collective IQ, because an organization is not just a collection of individuals. It is a collective. And if you're not being strategic around how you build that collective and how you maximize the IQ of that collective, you're leaving a lot of talent on the table, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. We both have sort of Google in our DNA, and I'm sure, you know, we're both familiar with, I think it's Project Aristotle, I might be mixing it up, but where they studied some 10,000 teams, and they actually went into the study around what makes for a high-performing team with the hypothesis that it's a bunch of high-performing individuals. And really the big finding that's come from that is that it's not necessarily that. It's actually all the conditions around it of psychological safety and structure and clarity, meaning and impact, and all of these kind of components that are conditions that we can intentionally create within any team. And I think too, the thing that I think is really relevant for this conversation is in a sort of mechanistic system, so any kind of machine system, the sum of its parts is the sum of its parts. 1 + 1 = 2. But in living systems, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So 1 + 1 is greater than 2. And there's something about like humans coming together that I think is always going to be really, really meaningful. Like this is a part of our evolutionary DNA, and there's beautiful, incredible things that come and creative things that come from that. And I'm not sure as organizations, we've really figured out how to code for that magic. Like everyone I'm sure has had that experience of being part of like a high performing team. And when they describe it, there's like a mystical tone to it. It's like, yeah, we just really got along. Like it just really hummed. Like we were really creative together. And again, as practitioners, we know there's conditions that we can actually intentionally design and create to unlock that. So I'd love to kind of go there and get your thoughts on like what makes group IQ thrive.
Yeah, so there's a study specifically that looked into this. So they hypothesized that, okay, well, we have this notion of individual intelligence, and we know that there's specific markers, specific things that we can correlate to high performance on a wide range of tasks. So they asked that very similar question. And it's kind of similar to the question Google asked, but this was more in the research context. And what they found actually was that there were a few factors, 3 to be specific, that had high correlation to these groups' performance on a wide variety of tasks. So they put, anywhere from 3 to 5 people together in these different groups. They ran them through all these varied and diverse tasks, and they determined which of them performed the best. And of those groups, they then said, okay, well, what did they have in common? Well, I can tell you there's 2 things that did not predict their actual performance. One was average IQ of the group, and the other was maximum IQ of the smartest person in the group. So those things had nothing to do with it. So when you think about hiring top talent in the organization, that top talent is not necessarily going to translate to group performance. And most of the work we do these days is within the context of teams. Okay, so that should be a big whoa factor for everybody in thinking about this. What they did find, however, is 3 things. 1, the average social sensitivity of the group members. So they measured social sensitivity, and the highest social sensitivity average of those group members was one of the biggest predictors of group performance. Second thing, Usha, you personally will not be surprised by this one because of a lot of the work that you've done in your consulting career, but the equality in distribution of conversational turn taking. So in other words, did people have equal opportunity to share? And did they feel that they had that opportunity to presumably, talk about their points of view and share their ideas and whatever the context might be? And then the third one, which is highly correlated to the first one, is proportion of females in the group.
Fascinating.
Yeah. So really
not surprising.
Right.
And I don't just say that because I'm a woman. I say that because culturally, I think social sensitivity is very much trained into us. I'm not saying every female necessarily scores highly, or I'm not making generalizations here, but I think there is a pattern that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you sort of take a step back and look at those 3 factors, some light bulbs should be going off in our heads around, whoa, okay, well, how are we then being intentional around our teams and our organizational design to be able to create this? Are we even selecting for social sensitivity in terms of our talent? And if that's the case, maybe that really shifts the way we think about it. I sort of reflect on some of the older research, the wisdom of the crowds. And we know that when you get a large number of people guessing the number of M&Ms in a jar or the weight of a cow, that you average all those things together and it becomes highly accurate. Well, we have, kind of this opportunity to think about our organizations as people coming together with these different perspectives, entry points that will ultimately get us to the right decisions as an organization if we can only employ them in a way that's going to get us there. And so, we have to think about how we create kind of these mini ecosystems in a way of teams set up to be able to deliver on their missions and truly use, the benefit of the collective people within each of those teams. And I think there's a few things that we're doing that sort of are counter to that.
Mm-hmm.
One of which is most of our incentives, most of our performance management systems are set up to valorize the individual. And
Absolutely.
I'm not saying that that's wrong. I'm saying it's incomplete because we obviously want people who are going to boost the performance within our companies. But I think that sometimes we have kind of a one-sided view of how we define performance, and we're missing the bigger picture around that.
And every time, both as a recipient and as a manager and as a consultant, what I've seen is when performance is done well, it's when people have received really meaningful feedback that helps them grow, and they feel like the organization is like invested in them, and it empowers them to continue to improve wherever they may be. I've seen this everywhere, from someone who's a quote unquote low performer through to someone who's a rock star, by all these kind of traditional metrics. And the other thing that really stands out to me in that is just how much of our work, I think, is actually going to be more and more in that vein of groups of people coming together to make decisions, to unpack complex situations and problems, and actually kind of steer together. And this notion, I think we really need to reimagine how to make that easier for different groups of people and different configurations of people to come together and have set of structures in place to have that social sensitivity, to have that kind of distribution of airtime. And really, to me, underlying that is really how many perspectives can actually enter in here, and how can we do that in a really thoughtful and reflective way.
Yeah, absolutely.
And all of that, I think we're still working our way, and some organizations do a better job than others, but I do think that's something for us to keep on our radar as this AI disruption is happening, which is a lot of the work that individuals are doing alone is going to start to be outsourced, I think, and it can be outsourced. We don't need humans to be like the bots, like coding, being, putting widgets in the thing and being a cog in the wheel anymore. I think we need humans to be decision makers, perspective holders, and kind of weaving things together. So it's really meaningful, and thinking about how do we optimize for this sort of collective IQ. And I'm interested in your perspective on how leadership teams do that in particular, because there's a sort of crucialness at that level that becomes even more important. Also, there's sometimes egos at play and kind of different factors that actually slow leadership teams down. And I'd love to kind of hear from you, like what you've seen work really well at that space.
Yeah, so I think there's something to add to this group IQ or collective IQ equation that is incredibly important, and that is individual brain regulation. So when we think about coming into work every single day, if we are on the brink of burnout, if we are feeling stress around the results, if we are feeling overwhelmed, we are, in essence, coming to the table with half of our brain capacity because we are in that fight or flight mode. And if you look at neuroscience, what it shows is the functioning IQ level of somebody who's in the red zone, so to speak, is about 2/3 of what their full capacity is. Okay, so if we start this conversation, it has to be with how are we regulating individuals across our organizations, and especially the leaders. So leaders have so much pressure, so much on their heads to be able to deliver. And so if they are in the red zone, and if they are in conflict with others within a leadership team, that's putting others in the red zone as well. So that's kind of like, step 0 in this whole process is how do we think about regulation, and how can that become part of the bigger conversation? I think the second thing related to leadership teams is exactly this simplicity of ensuring that every voice is heard around the table. I saw a really fascinating article during COVID of the US Supreme Court. And I thought this was such an interesting sort of microcosm of this. But think about the US Supreme Court. They are, making the most difficult decisions that you could possibly imagine. And pre-COVID, it was very much free for all. And what you saw was there were some justices who were proportionately speaking much longer and much more at length than others. And in fact, there were some justices who almost never spoke at all. And then what happened was when they went to COVID measures and they had to connect virtually to hear different cases, they instituted a new structure whereby each justice got a set amount of time to ask questions, and they held that time for each person. And what they saw was the level of debate went up significantly because of that systematic process of hearing from each of those justices. And it's so interesting to then think about our own leadership teams. We've all had experience with our leadership teams giving presentations, asking for decisions, and you can see those dynamics play out. You have the people who talk no matter what. You have the people who sit back and don't say anything. You have the people who jump in and have to scrutinize every number on the slide because that's what they do. So all these leadership team members sort of settle into different personas or roles, which in and of itself is not a bad thing. I think it's, again, that the diverse perspectives, the diverse personalities. But the problem is when you're not intentionally hearing from every single person, the decision making can become skewed very quickly because it automatically starts to be biased towards the people who speak up. So I think that that's probably the most, if I were to say one thing that leadership teams could do, it would be structuring the meetings in a way to ensure that on important decisions, every voice is heard. So that's point number one. I think the second point is, getting really clear around what they're using that time for, because you can put people into a meeting room and walk out with actually nothing being done. You're sort of
no decision made.
That's right. And status updates and all these different things. So being much more clear on the purpose of a meeting and what you need to accomplish in that is also, it's not rocket science, right? This is the easy stuff. And yet we're not very good at being disciplined to do this. So lots of room for improvement, I think, as far as leadership teams are concerned. But, a good test is record one of your leadership team meetings, go back and time it to see how many people are getting what talk time, and be real about that, be real about the dynamics.
There's actually AI tools that do that now.
Love that.
What a great way to leverage. What a great way to leverage some of that. One thing I'll add to this really interesting discussion around leadership teams is I've seen within some organizations, or maybe I'll start in the positive, where I've seen this leadership teams perform really well is when every leader is really holding a kind of strategic and systemic perspective. So they're really acting as a steward for the organization, not just steward for their division, and not just sort of like this is my silo, I represented this silo, now you're talking about that thing over there, like I can zone out for this hour and I don't really, that sometimes happens, and it's ultimately quite ineffective. And it's teams that actually really come together as teams and the decisions are being made collectively at the leadership level that I think churn out decisions that impact the entire organization as well as your sort of customer base with much more kind of strategic thoughtfulness and just like effectiveness, because it's, even if it seems like maybe parts of the conversations are not relevant, everything is relevant for the organization. And when you're at that table, everything should matter to you, maybe to differing degrees, but it should all matter. Yeah.
I think it's such an excellent point, and I couldn't agree more. one of the things we were very intentional around when we were considering leadership succession at Chanel was not only the individual expertise that they brought to the table, but also what they would be adding to the dynamic of that leadership team. And that dynamic was something that we thought very intentionally about. And I completely agree with you. That is the whole point. That's the alchemy of effective leadership teams, is really being able to tap into all the different perspectives. Again, it goes back to the more perspectives we have to look at all the different angles that we might be missing, the more we are reducing our risk and being much more intentional around, the decisions that we're making. So couldn't agree more.
And I think for leaders too, this would be kind of like my one thing that I would offer to senior leaders, which is be really mindful of when you're in problem solving mode versus decision making mode. Because decision making mode is really lift up, lift out of the weeds. Don't just try and solve this like unique problem over here, but actually think about the system as a whole and what's the impact as a whole, and kind of avoid the rabbit holes. And again, it's different mode versus problem solving mode. Go to town. Switching gears a little bit, I'd love to hear from you just about what do you think is a feature of AI done really well in a people context?
Yeah, so we're learning, all of us are learning. And I think this is the great thing about your topic, bringing this to the table, is to be actively thinking about this and considering it. So far, one of the things that I see the potential for is exactly what you mentioned before, this notion of being seen in an organization, valued for what we're bringing. I think that the current way that we evaluate people tends to be very reductive, and we end up in a bucket. We get a rating, and that rating then translates to some compensation. Well, guess what? That rating is going to demotivate 90 to 95% of the people in the organization. So talk about dysregulation. You're doing that systematically once a year when you're giving people these ratings. What I think AI can do is actually help us combat things like recency bias, confirmation bias, and be much more holistic. So can you imagine a scenario, for example, where, I'm compiling my thoughts on somebody's performance, getting input from different peers, getting some artifacts of their work, feeding that into AI, and then coming out at the other end with a much more integrated analysis of where somebody's performing, what they're getting right, where their areas for improvement are. And I think that there's such an opportunity to create better appreciation for human beings, because if you walk away from a review feeling like that was so reductive, I don't feel appreciated at all.
Versus a number will always leave you feeling that way, regardless of what the number is.
That's exactly right. But if you walk away feeling like, wow, I really felt seen and heard, I felt that my contributions were really represented well, and the areas of improvement really resonate for me. Like, I trust that because I feel that the rest of me is also being appreciated. So I think we have a lot of opportunity to really rethink the way we're doing that. And in fact, one of my favorite people platforms right now is a company called Confirm, and they're doing a load of work to actually gather signals, not just from the managers, but also the rest of the organization. So they're using kind of this collective IQ to be able to pull all these different signals of who's supporting whom, who's having an impact, who, deserves extra praise, who needs support, and then pulling that together into a very integrated and holistic and AI aided, summary of those things. And so I'm a huge fan of the work that they're doing around this.
Yeah, it's so interesting. This connects back to the piece around how airtime is shared in the meeting, et cetera. In that, I think one of the things we need to recognize is when our perspectives come together, the tapestry that creates gives us so much more information and a much better steer on the holistic view and where to go next. Whether that's how can this individual, improve and do even better, or it's what is the right decision in this moment. And I think it's really recognizing that and optimizing how we bring and weave that tapestry together more and more intentionally.
Yeah, absolutely.
My last question for you then, Julie, is for a senior leader out there who's listening to this, who's, sitting in this disruption, unsure, like we're all feeling our way forward. I don't think there's any real experts or clarity that's existing in this space. What's one thing you would say? What's one piece of advice for where they may begin to really reconcile all of this?
I think what the thought that's forming in my head around this is that AI is inevitable, just like all of the other technological tsunamis that came before us.
Yeah.
And so, how do we coexist with this in a way that's going to be advantageous for everyone? And the way that I'm starting to think about it is using AI not to replace our brains, but to serve as our agents. Okay, so think about it this way. Like there's a very big difference between being lazy, so putting in the prompt for your essay into AI and saying, write this for me, and then turning it in as your homework assignment, versus putting the thoughts together, forcing your brain to do the work of the stuff that really matters, and then giving it to AI and going, okay, these are my ideas. Help me make it better. Help me generate the headlines. Help me promote this in a way that's going to get the right attention. Help me translate this to marketing strategies. Like that for me is kind of the complement. So if you think about, kind of a talent agent in a way, I have a friend in my network who's working on this idea of having a talent agent and what that might look like. I love that idea because that's ultimately what it's about. I would never outsource my writing or my presentations to AI. Once that's done, I wouldn't hesitate to feed that in and go, all right, give me a good title for this, because I'm terrible at representing my own work. I'm terrible at promoting myself, but the AI can do that, So I think it's a way of amplifying the good work that we're doing, as opposed to replacing our brains. But that takes courage. It takes courage to stand up and say, I'm not going to outsource these thought processes. I'm not going to do that. But that's where I think we're going to see, maybe, I don't know, can we differentiate the people who are using it that are not? And I think in some cases we can. We talk about AI slop, and you can tell kind of the tones around that, but I think it's increasingly becoming more difficult. And so when that is the case, then it takes a stand. You have to take a stand.
Yeah. And, I think underlying that, what I'm picking up on is like human judgment and human insight isn't just the kind of sum total of all of the knowledge that's here. There's something more. And that's where the kind of, again, the ethics, the empathy, the like, what does this mean for people? All of those components come in a way that's connected to others, in a way that's connected to the context, and empowering. What I'm hearing from you is like, empower your people to do more of that, empower them to be the actual, the keepers of the judgment, the keepers of the direction and the strategy, and have the AI be the agent, and have that partnership be one of, that is a partnership, first of all, and that it's life affirming in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Love it.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Julie. It's been such a pleasure to have this conversation with you. And for anyone who's interested in following along these conversations, you'll find it on YouTube, subscribe, all that good stuff. Thank you for joining me, Julie. And thank you to everyone who's listening.